Kagurabachi. We have a lot to talk about, don't we? Honestly, what a magnificent chapter. I always love lore. I love stuff that provides context. I really love stuff that recontextualizes characters and your idea and perception of the story. Seeing so much in such a short amount of pages that provides such clarity, but even more mystery, more excitement, more eagerness to see the future, to see how all of this comes together is brilliant. And look, I'm a glazer of Hokuzono. I love how he approaches his story. I love how he approaches his lore, his characters. This is just another one of many instances where he capitalizes perfectly on excitement. What you may think is going to happen, he throws you a curveball. And that curveball is actually the biggest revelation in the story so far. The war that has been so elusive with information. We knew bits and pieces and stuff coming from different perspectives that wasn't really lining up properly. The only thing that was concrete was a great sin. This directly plays into Samura and his role to kill all of the sword bearers. But again, recontextualizing. That is this beauty. Samura is now different. We now understand him a little bit more because we now understand the war a little bit more. Let us start with an overview. The island did appear. People did wage war from that island. They were called psychotic savages. That is not true. They are human. They have feelings. They weren't murderous, relentless killers or savages, was depicted to the public. A war did rage on. Japan did create the enchanted blades. They deployed those weapons into the battlefield and pushed that invasion back onto the island. Innocent civilians were caught in the crossfire, and the royalty on that island surrendered. They drew up a peace treaty, and that stopped the war. However, Magutsumi and its wielder was not satisfied. They were thirsty, they were hungry, and they went berserk. Magutsumi or Shinichi did the unthinkable. It obliterated that entire island. It killed over 200,000 people. Men, women, children, innocent people that weren't a part of this war that had originally surrendered and signed underneath that peace treaty. Safe to say that Magutsumi went out of control. The only thing that could stop this wielder was the 5 other enchanted blades, which is what happened. Perhaps what happened is that they separated the sword from its wielder and were able to keep them apart to win the fight. They didn't kill him, they locked him away, and that is where he has been this entire time. Fun fact about the wielder of Magutsumi, he was a very close ally or friend to Chihiro's father, so much so that he entrusted the construct of the sword itself and how the internal contracts work to his friend. I'll explain what that means in a moment, but this would imply that originally the wielder of Magutsumi or Shinichi was actually a good person, a masterful swordsman, the sword saint. But somewhere over the length of the war, he went berserk. Now the massacre that Magutsumi or Shinichi committed is called the malediction, the massacre of that island. And there's a lot of important information that is critical to understand on why it actually happened. It's not fully clear, but it gives you a very good idea. Firstly, they explain that the wielder accessed the true realm of the sword, which is presumably malediction. But the reason the wielder accessed the true realm is because the sword and the wielder's intentions combined with each other. They consumed each other. They fed off each other. On a bigger scale, this confirms that a part of the sword, the true realm of the enchanted blades, conforms to the user's ideology, their emotions, their personality, and what they truly believe. But there is a problem here with the Shinichi or Magutsumi wielder. They were perhaps originally good because they were very close friends and a trusted ally to Chihiro's father. So what happened? Well, one can assume that before this massacre took place, because of the war and the countless bodies that the sword Magutsumi actually came in contact with, it started to feed. So far, every time we have seen this sword, it consumes life. It's hungry, it's thirsty, and it's incredibly uncontrollable. This consumption of life force is concerning because if it is something that it constantly needs, an insatiable hunger, it could drive the wielder of the sword theoretically insane. As long as you're wielding the sword and killing people, you're feeding the sword and making it happy. But if you're not, if perhaps a peace treaty takes place and no killing is allowed, perhaps a massacre could take place. I want to talk about malediction for a moment, right? This was the English translation of this event or true realm of the enchanted blade, but it would seem, thanks to a multitude of talented translators on Twitter, that the actual word used was Kodoku. You have heard this word before. If you are a fan of Kaizen, you've known it for Sukuna's bath. If you're a fan of Hunter x Hunter, you've seen it with the Succession War. Kodoku, in its simplest terms, is putting a bunch of different insects together, having them fight and poison and kill each other in a jar, and the one victor that comes out on top is kind of like the king insect. Now, folklore-wise, that can bestow great gifts onto the person feeding it, but it can also cause great calamity. The word itself translates to curse poison or curse poison magic. This is what Magutsumi represents. This would imply that the sword has to be fed, that it constantly needs to feed to be satiated. And if it is not, it will go out of control and it will cause a great calamity. There is an issue here. However, it's said that both the sword and the sword wielder connect to each other within its true realm. So either you have to believe that to some degree, Chihiro's trusted friend started to lose control on his own without the presence of the sword, or the sword majorly drew all of the negative emotions out and brought it to the forefront. There is a careful balance and understanding between the two. If you go too far into either side, whether it be human or sword, you start to give priority. For example, if the sword is such a negative thing, any person that comes in contact with it would go down the exact same path. But with the way that the swords are described, that's not necessarily the case. That there is human intention and involvement and a conformity between the two, a balance. So while a sword could definitely manipulate and twist and consume its user, it shouldn't technically be able to do it fully, unless it starts to pull out latent, hidden, or dormant feelings or ideas that were actually a part of the wielder. A great example I can probably give you, which is currently a theory but now makes a lot more sense, is Samura. We had the wrong idea about him, specifically his intentions towards Chihiro and Uraha. This is a very powerful swordsman, and it always sat wrong with me that he would not flat out kill Chihiro and Uraha. Because of very specific information that I'll talk about in a moment, it would seem that Samura is trying to disconnect the enchanted blade users from their sword. Only way that you can do this is by killing that user and potentially bringing them back to life. If Samura's true realm for his sword conforms around his very strong beliefs and ideals, it would make perfect sense for him to kill all of the enchanted blade wielders and bring them back to life. So this would make sense why he kills Chihiro, and also make sense why he kills Uraha. Briefly, just to mention, Chihiro also magically healed. Not from the doctors, not from his own sword or anything else, he was just healed. Shiba didn't even know why. Uraha is left in the dark. Supposedly he's in a morgue, but information can't be found about him. There'd be no reason to play upon Uraha that way, just confirm his death and move forward. Instead, you leave it in the dark for situations like this that makes Samura's intention even more clear. If he wanted Uraha and he wanted Chihiro dead, they would be, fully, full stop. But Chihiro is alive and disconnected from his sword, and Uraha, I assume, most likely is alive and also disconnected from his sword, because that is Samura's goal, but not the original negative way. You see, the issue with Magutsumi or Shinichi and the eternal contracts is that they're all connected to Magutsumi. So if Magutsumi or Shinichi's wielder dies, everybody else connected to the sword at the time also dies. You can see why now Samura would want to free everybody from their swords. So when he goes to fight Magutsumi and Shinichi, he has nothing to worry about. He can safely and freely fight Magutsumi to the death, kill the Sword Saint, which in turn would kill him as well. You might ask a question, why kill Chihiro? His sword isn't connected to the Magatsumi Eternal Contracts. This is true, but Samura would not know this. The reason the Magatsumi Eternal Contract is the center of all of them is because of time constraints. Chihiro's father did not have enough time to meticulously craft the internal contract for each blade. So instead, having them all connected together with the center being Magatsumi made the most sense, and they were prepped for that going into the war. Chihiro unfortunately just got in the way, and if the true realm of the swords reflect a person's most inner desirable thing, Samura wants to create a future for his daughter and for everybody else, and to potentially repent for his sins, the death of Magatsumi and himself. All of this is to avoid the calamity in the future that if Magatsumi Ushinuchi isn't killed, it will happen again. This is powerful recontextualization for Samura. Parts of the war is still murky, seeing the clarity of it, the bigger picture reveal itself puts things into perspective. We now understand Samura fully. Working with Yura, killing Uraha and Chihiro, it all starts to make sense. Hiko could have an eternal contract, any of the other Hishaku members could have an eternal contract, but as long as Samura gets to Magatsumi while all of his friends are disconnected through death and rebirth, which is what his sword likely represents now, he can kill Magatsumi or Shinuchi, and that will kill every other wielder. I think it's very important to note that it's only the body. The sword still remains, and we don't really know how the internal contract repeats. For example, if you kill Magatsumi or Shinuchi's wielder, theoretically, for now, the sword still remains. If another person were to grab that sword, let's say Yura for example, do all of the internal contracts spawn around it again? That would mean all of the internal contracts would be connected to Yura. Or, on the other hand, is Yura trying to create his own eternal contract, something similar to Chihiro? We know he's very good with contracts and binding vows. He was the person to undo the Magatsumi seal. There's a high chance that he is looking into that. I think hands down this was one of my favorite chapters. Everything about this lore and this context and its value is so beautiful and powerful and tragic. It makes me so excited to see what the future holds and what a fight even looks like between Magatsumi, Shinuchi, and everybody else. Is this someone that they can even kill? If this person is truly out of control, truly berserk, truly been dormant for so long, the hunger that they will bring to the battlefield is ridiculous. But I guess a real mystery, a real head scratcher. How does Yura know all of this? Was he part of the government? Was he part of the Kabanabi, even though no one recognizes him? Or was he from the island? Did he experience this war and this tragedy firsthand? Is he someone that's seeking revenge? Seeking something else entirely? Only time will tell.